heading south of the Mason-Dixon. This is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 221, covering the week of June 29th through July 3rd, 2020. Glad to have you back on the program. Very glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Abbeville Institute, like our Facebook page at Abbeville Institute, and of course, subscribe to our YouTube page at Abbeville Institute. You can find all those social media accounts at our webpage, abbevilleinstitute.org. While you're there, give us an email address, and we'll give you a free ebook, Exploring the Southern Tradition. You get on our mailing list. You'll get our Daily Dose of Dixie Monday through Friday. It's a great way to keep up with the Institute. Also, you can download our free mobile app. Just go to your app store, wherever you get that, Google Play, iTunes, wherever you get your apps, the Apple Store, and look for Abbeville Institute. Comes up free of charge. Download it. You've got the podcast on the go, all of our lectures on the go, the website on the go. Again, free of charge. Great way to stay in touch with the Institute. Also, don't forget to share our material around on social media. If you like the podcast, rate it wherever you get your podcasts. And remember that we exist on your generous contributions alone. So if you like anything that we do, please consider a tax-deductible donation to the full extent of the law. You can just go to abbevilleinstitute.org, click on that support tab. You can click on that donor options, and it'll give you ways to donate, whether it's monthly, annually. Lots of great ways to support the Institute. We have our press, which some people have supported. We've got new books coming out with that. We are working on videos behind the scenes to counter some of the stuff that's going on. So we have things that are going on that we need your support to continue to do. So please consider that donation to the Abbeville Institute. Also, you can click on that shop tab. You can get your Abbeville Institute apparel. It's high-quality embroidered stuff, so you got our logo on it. You get on hats, golf shirts, T-shirts, fleece, pullovers, golf towels, all kinds of cool stuff. So consider getting that as well. It also advertises the Abbeville Institute. All right. Well, we took off last week, or at least I was not able to do the podcast last week, so we've had a lot of material in the meantime. And look, we live in this Orwellian nightmare. I mean, everything that's happening right now is just unprecedented. I don't think there's been a time in American history when we've seen this much vitriol at symbols. I mean, it's amazing. Now, some people have pointed out this is funny because, as Confederate statues are coming down, we know the Stonewall Jackson Monument came down in Richmond yesterday as I'm recording this podcast. And we know that Lee's going to come down. I mean, all these things are going to come down. It's just a matter of time. Symbols are under attack. A friend of the Institute, Paul Graham, noted that one of his books from Shotwell Press, which is a great press. You don't know anything about Shotwell, you should be getting their books, was labeled as Confederate merchandise because it had a flag on it. Well, he argued, and they, of course, gave it back, let them sell it again. But this is the kind of stuff we're going to see on a regular basis. My newest book, if you don't know, it's entitled Southern Scribblings. Ben Jones, who is better known as Cooter on the Dukes of Hazzard, was gracious enough to write the foreword. So that's got a Confederate flag on it, so who knows what's going to happen with that. But if you want to get that book, just go to Amazon and look for my name, Brian McClanahan, and get Southern Scribblings. But we've got this hysteria going on in America today. I mean, it's unprecedented. Unprecedented. The attack and the vitriol on benign things like symbols. Things that would seem to be harmless. Dixie, the term Dixie, is now seen as problematic. The Dixie Chicks changed the name. Who cares, first of all, about the Dixie Chicks? It's just a horrible country band. But now they're just the Chicks. Now, it would have been seen as anti-feminist not long ago to call yourself the Chicks. But now they're the Chicks. So that's better. That's preferable to Dixie. I mean, crazy. Dixie State University in Utah is talking about changing their name, getting rid of Dixie. And there is a backlash. The people in Utah are protesting that. They want to keep it Dixie. So we're seeing some very strange things in 2020. People are they're outdoing themselves on a regular basis to try to come up with the next thing they can do to show that they're woke, to show that they're in line with the modern PC attack on everything tradition in America. What can they do to advance that further? This is similar to the French Revolution without lopping off heads. But, they're always trying to outdo each other. We're going to be a little bit more Republican, a little bit more revolutionary, just a little bit more. And, of course, then the reaction to that was, when you got the reign of terror eventually, then the reaction was that everyone who was involved in that lost their heads. So I don't know what's going to happen here. I don't know if rational, sensible people are just going to finally wake up and say, this is just a bunch of stupidity. Look, all you children, all you petulant little children throwing fits, just shut up. I know that some of this is starting to happen. There are starting to be crackdowns in areas where these people are going and vandalizing things. And this is great. It needed to happen right away. We know it didn't. Last week we had a piece by Boyd Cathy on North Carolina and how the governor is simply complicit in this. I mean, let the rioters do their worst, I won't stand in their way. Roy Cooper, has just decided he's going to let happen whatever wants to happen. And that's because the rot has reached the State House. These people are determined to get rid of these things, and this is just a convenient way to do it. You side with the radicals for a brief amount of time. You keep the establishment in power. That's what Joe Biden's all about for the left. You keep the establishment in power, you side with the radicals, and then you smash them because they realize that most Americans are not in line with this stupidity that's going on in America right now. Corporations are, because corporations want to make money. They think that that's the avenue to do it, is by pandering. But for most people, they think this is just absolutely ridiculous. The attack on monuments and symbols is ridiculous. We can separate that from some of the social issues, which is something entirely different. And then, of course, last week we ran a piece by Paul Yarborough, Tucker and the Confederacy. Tucker Carlson is usually rock solid. Of course, he has to do the obligatory, the South was evil, the Confederacy was evil, it's awful. This is the neoconservative obligatory tip of the hat to the Lincolnians. You see, they are one of the greatest problems. And not long ago, there was a piece published in the Federalist, which called them all out. It's your fault that we're seeing this right now. You are the ones who said it was okay to take down Confederate monuments. Once the right lost any defense of Confederate monuments, the floodgates were going to be open to everything else. And this is exactly what's happened. And these people couldn't see it because they thought, oh, these lefties, yeah, they love George Washington. They love Thomas Jefferson. No, they don't. These people don't pay attention. They don't love any of those people. So we've got this bizarro world of symbols under attack, of benign things like the name Dixie, or in Rhode Island, they're changing the name of the state from Rhode Island and Providence Plantations because plantation connotes is a connotation for slavery. And then you've got people wanting to, real estate agents getting rid of the term master bedroom because that denotes slavery. This is just so ridiculously stupid, insanely stupid. I don't know where it stops. I really don't. Well, this all goes back, and so because of that, the piece we ran on Friday this week, I wrote it, it was it's the Southern Rock for the Apocalypse Dixie version. And so I just included a whole bunch of versions of Dixie because who knows how long that song will last. Now, we know it's already it's not allowed to be played in acceptable company anymore. Who knows how long it will last before it becomes illegal to play it? Actually physically illegal. Like the bagpipes were in Scotland after 1745. You couldn't play them anymore. Who knows how long that will happen? Maybe even the instruments used, you won't be able to play those anymore because, the banjo and the fiddle will be considered some type of, racist instrument because they play bluegrass. I don't know. This is, I honestly can't make up this stuff because some of these things could actually happen with the way the stupidity in America today. And the problem is you have capitulators. And the piece on Wednesday by J.L. Bennett, Waving the White Flag Won't Save the UDC, is accurate. Look, the UDC, which for years was in the vanguard of putting up monuments and defending those monuments, has simply said, we're not doing it anymore. And if you want to rise to the ranks, you can't support the flag. And so we've got a real problem. Now, there are good, of course, camps out there, or local organizations for the UDC, but It seems the national organization has just abandoned all hope, and they've waved the white flag on the Confederate flag, and it's all to appease to a group of people that you can't appease. All to appeal to a group of people, I should say, you can't appeal to and you can't appease. You can't appease these people. They don't want you around. If you favor any Southern symbols or anything traditional in America, they don't want you. You're not really welcome. And all this goes back to a Lincolnian view of America. You see, that's really what's happening here. Eric Foner wrote his History of Reconstruction. He called it an unfinished revolution. And look, Foner's a Marxist. And the left has essentially picked up on that mantra and decided to make Reconstruction to finish it. They're going to finish it. The problem is you have, as I mentioned before, the neoconservatives who are certainly in line with that, because to them the Confederacy are a bunch of evil Democrats. And see, this is where they live in this Republican-Democrat dichotomy, which is so stupid. Not only that, they are Lincoln lovers, and they believe that Lincoln is a saint, a virtual American saint, and that Lincoln is everything. And when you look at Lincoln's role in modern America, you see that the one-size-fits-all government solutions to everything that we have, the radicalization of the United States, it all goes back to Lincoln. The entire premise that secession is treason goes back to Lincoln, goes back to the Republican Party. See, there is the problem. Robert E. Lee is bad because he committed treason against the United States. It doesn't matter the fact that U.S. Grant owned more slaves, legally owned more slaves than Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee never legally owned a single slave. U.S. Grant did. And this is why the neoconservatives were all up in arms. Oh my gosh, they took down a Grant statue. Well, he was more of a slave owner than Robert E. Lee. I mean, what do you expect? Any of these statues to anybody that glorifies anything in Western civilization, even Abraham Lincoln, has to come down. Now, I blurbed on the back of DiLorenzo's book, which is The Problem with Lincoln, and it's his new, he wrote a piece on it on Monday, that Americans should bring sledgehammers to the Lincoln Memorial. Well, they should. If we're really going to take down the root of all of this discontent in America, wouldn't America have been better off overall? I mean, we can talk about the end of slavery, but Lincoln wasn't concerned about the end of slavery in 1861. He said it. He said it. He wasn't concerned about it. He wanted to save the Union. By saving the Union, though, he put incompatible things together. And those incompatible things ended up being a North and a South that was subjugated. And so this created a lot of the problems. Parting ways would not have been more politically expedient and peaceful long term. I mean, it caused a great big war by saying we got to keep you in the Union. It ended up killing 1 million plus people when you count civilians, and tremendous amounts of property destruction. I mean, it was horrible. So, why? Well, he had to come up with some moral reason to do it. You can't just wipe out 1 million people and say that we're just doing it to save the Union. Nobody would agree with that. So eventually it had to be, well, we're going to end slavery. But that was not his war aim in 1861. And we still had slave states in the Union in 1861. They only left when Lincoln decided he was going to send troops into the South. So we had two slaveholding republics battling it out, even at the time, even when the Upper South seceded. There were still slaveholding states in the Union that, by the way, did not end slavery until after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. But there were people who were more reasonable, and John Morcourt, our resident scholar in Japan, talked about this last week, A Voice of Reason. It was an excellent little piece on a little-known Iowa Democrat named Charles Mason. Mason was an abolitionist. He opposed the institution of slavery. But he also said it didn't violate the Constitution, so he really couldn't do anything about it. And Mason wanted to avoid war because he wanted a peaceful solution to a big problem. As Jack said, his fervent hope, though, was that if secession did become a reality and a new Southern nation created, that the two countries could then begin to negotiate their differences in a peaceful manner, somehow resolve them, and ultimately reunite. But peace, not war. You see, you didn't have to have war. Lincoln chose that. Lincoln chose that path. I think De Lorenzo's piece is awesome, and the book is just great. I mean, it's a fantastic book. I would suggest it comes out, I think, the 7th is the release date, so the official release date. So a couple of days from now, I would recommend picking it up. It's well worth your time to do so, and well worth your time to read. But this gets back to, I think, some of the underlying problems that we have in incompatible things in the United States. And the piece on Thursday on Edgar Allan Poe, I think, speaks to that. Clyde Wilson, this is part 10 of his series on Southern poets and poems. And I think he does a good job pointing out that Poe was persona non grata in the North. Poe did not like Northern writers, and they didn't like him. One of the greatest American writers. And if you take an American literature course, you're going to get Edgar Allan Poe, but he's often described as an American author, not a Southern author, but he was. He did not like Northerners. He did not like Northern literature. He didn't think that it was worth anything. He was very much pro-Southern, and so you had this perspective of identity, identifying with the South as a Southern people. In contrast to what Drew Gilpin Faust has to say, there was Southern identity long before we had the Confederacy and long before slavery was thrust into the issue. It wasn't just slavery that put Southerners together. It was so many other things. I think David Hackett Fisher has done a marvelous job in pointing that out in his Albion Seed. I mean, this cultural glue that was so important, North and South. I mean, the North had their own distinctive culture and identity. You had the piece last week by Aaron Gleason, I Stand with the South. He's not from the South. But he sympathizes with the South, and he says what we need is a reevaluation of conservatism in America. Well, I agree. What is conservatism in America anymore but Lincolnian nationalism, at least in the mainstream? So this is something that Southern conservatives have been saying for years. There is no home for them anywhere. The Republican Party will abandon them, and they have across the South. Look at Mississippi. It was the Republican Party that took down the flag or agreed to have a vote on removing the flag from the state flag, the battle flag from the state flag. It's Republicans that have been in the vanguard of trying to change all these things across the South because, again, they believe this is going to get them votes. This is what people want. It's incorrect, but they're pandering to a certain segment of the population. Maybe if they do this, it's going to create goodwill and the left will stop attacking them. False. False. The left will not stop attacking you. They never will. This is their agenda. They attack, they attack, they attack. And when you capitulate, that's when you've opened the door to more and more. We saw this in 2015 with Nikki Haley and the battle flag there in the Capitol. We knew that wasn't going to stop. It was going to come down. It had to come down. We knew actually in 2000 it was going to eventually come down. It came off the dome, and then it had to go to the Soldiers Monument, and then, of course, it was going to come down from there. It would just have to. It was a matter of time. And I remember, because I was living in South Carolina at the time, talking to an African-American man that I knew, and he called it, he wasn't happy with the fact it was staying on the State House grounds. He wanted it gone from there. And it was just a matter of time. The situation had to be right for them to push, for the opponents of the flag to push the agenda. That it had to come down from there. That, of course, those conversations were always civil. I had an opinion, he had an opinion, and we were friendly otherwise. I mean, he didn't like it. I thought the flag should stay there. South Carolina was a Confederate state, honoring Confederate soldiers. But we had a difference of opinion on that. And this is the thing. People personally can have these, and these times seem to be forgotten. I think social media has contributed a lot to this, and the vitriol and things that people say. because you're behind a computer and there isn't any accountability. And people are quick to call you all kinds of nasty things. Then, of course, that creates a reaction, a visceral reaction, usually from other people who don't want to be called nasty things because they're just minding their own business. But regardless, we have people that are not from the South. We get this all. I get emails all the time from people like, "Gosh, I'm from X state in the North, or I'm from overseas, and I really like the Southern tradition. I really like what it has to offer." And so, poetry is that. Music is that. Those songs that. The piece that I gave all the different versions of Dixie. One of those is from Ireland. It's the Wolfe Tones, a great Irish folk band. They're singing Dixie. I mean, amazing. But you've got a college in Nebraska, their choir is singing Dixie. You've got Southern rock bands. You've got Northerners like Billy Murray, who was the most famous singer in the United States, but he's from the North, singing Dixie in the early 20th century. You have Liberace playing Dixie. Now, anyone who, if you don't know anything about Liberace was, very much on the left. I mean, he had a television show in the 1950s, great piano player, very flamboyant homosexual activist, but he loved playing Dixie. So, here's a song. You have Louis Armstrong playing Dixie. Now, if this song was so bad and so offensive, if the South was so bad and so offensive, why would these people do it? Why would they do it? You've got, of course, Bobby Horton's version. You've got Leonard Skinner. You've got all kinds of great versions of the song, bluegrass versions, country versions, rock versions, orchestral versions. It's just fantastic. And the song is played all over the world. It's a song that's recognized around the world as symbolic of the South. And yet now you can't even say the term. Crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So when you look at saving Southern identity and Southern culture, poetry is certainly a part of that. And rescuing Edgar Allan Poe from the clutches of Americanism and making him Southern, which he was, identifying as Southern, is very important. Pointing out to people like Tucker Carlson, you're digging your own hole by attacking the most conservative section in the United States, in the South. Everyone recognized that. H.L. Mencken said the only thing that's good in America has been old Southern culture. That's what was good. That's what was true and valuable in America. So the Abbeville Institute is trying to preserve that part of it. We can all talk about the bad things, and I've said this before many times on this program. Every rose has its thorns, right? So the Southern tradition is a rose. It has thorns, but you don't chop down the entire rose bush just to get rid of the thorns. You deal with the thorns and move on, and you still admire the rose. The South has been compared to a garden, a beautiful garden that needs tending because it's become overgrown with weeds and other things. And so you tend to that garden and you make it bloom again. Well, poetry does that. Music does that. Art, food, things that certainly identify. And, of course, also the Southern political tradition, which is a valuable part of American society in moving forward in what it offers to America, which is decentralization, local solutions to local problems, real federalism. These are the things the South stood for. John C. Calhoun, very Republican with a lowercase r, yet his statue has to come down because slavery. And it's just stupid. If you read anything what he said with an objective mind outside of the slavery, which really, look, his position on slavery was not unique. It wasn't even unique to the South. This was crafted in the North before Calhoun even said this. As Larry Tides has pointed out in his great book, Pro-Slavery, which is just a discussion of pro-slavery ideology in America from the 18th century forward. And it comes out of Northern theological instruction. So Calhoun, that was the most, his position on slavery was the most ununique part of his political philosophy. It wasn't novel at all. I mean, that was what Northerners were saying about the institution long before Calhoun said it. But his positions that were unique were on things like the concurrent majority, nullification. His disquisition on government is just fantastic. He is spot on with the abuse of power that the two-party system in the Constitution created. Calhoun is the most original American political thinker. Yet, because of his positions on slavery, he has to come down. And, you know, it's funny because when Jackson came down, I posted on social media a quote by E.L. Godkin, who was a Northern, somewhat libertarian/conservative thinker. He was included in Russell Kirk's The Conservative Mind, and Clyde Wilson and I included him in our Forgotten Conservatives in American History. And he was a Northern correspondent during the war, but when Stonewall Jackson died, he wrote that Jackson was one of the best things America ever produced. And I quoted that, and of course it got a lot of people liked it. But there was one person that said, well, great, now we can talk about him in history books. And my response to that was, yeah, because, you know, history books are so objective. Jackson is not even discussed in history books anymore except being a traitor and a slaver, which he really wasn't either. But yet, so this is what Jackson remembered in history books, but you have this monument which remembers him in another way. It's a counterweight to the nonsense of the modern academy. Robert E. Lee, same thing. Jefferson Davis, same thing. The monuments are the soul of the American tradition. All the monuments across the United States, whether they're Confederate monuments or U.S. monuments, whatever they are the soul of America. Mount Rushmore, the Martin Luther King Monument in D.C., this is the soul of America. It's what Americans think needs to be recognized across generations, across time. And so by tearing these down, you are, in essence, rewriting how Americans think about their past. Because the history books are not going to have an objective view of any of these individuals that are being torn down at all. Not the ones that mainstream America will get, not the ones that your mainstream curriculum companies will produce, and not the ones that schools will adopt. But certainly, people can keep believing that this is going to be the case. So we're in this very bizarre world, and again, that deep identity, that the consistency across generations, the things that make the South unique and her people unique across racial lines. I mean, this is not just, it's not race at all. It's place, it's people, it's the things that Southerners who are in this place can identify with. And I think that's the important part that we need to understand. And what we try to do at the Institute is why we have a variety of voices on all kinds of things. You know, some people don't like some of the articles we produce, and then they like others. I mean, we try to have a variety of voices because the South is a diverse place. But the thing that holds it all together, of course, are those common things. Those permanent things, as Russell Kirk called them, the permanent things. And those permanent things are under assault. All of them. When you take them away, you remove the continuity with generations. And that is the point. That is what the effort is on the modern left, to remove that continuity. Because if you can take away every bit of history before a certain date, whether it's 1975, which is a date I've given, the end of Reconstruction, but now it's ongoing again, whether it's 1975 or 1995 or 2009 when Barack Obama was canonized as the next American saint, you create that disconnect, and that's the point. You remove it from their conscience. And so now they become whatever you want them to be. I've said before, the reason these monuments and symbols are under attack is because they're dissidents. They represent opposition to the central authority, to the modern American empire. And that's why they have to go. They represent opposition to the modern leftist agenda, to the modern progressive movement. They are ancient relics that have to come down. One of the things people have noted is that, well, I mean, during the American War for Independence, Americans took down statues of George III. This is true, they did. They took those down. They attacked monuments. Now, some did, not all. and some thought this was wrong while it was going on. There's a big difference between that, though, and Confederate statues. George III was an arbitrary power who had complete control over the American colonies. And not just that, George III was no longer part of the United States, or what became the United States. He was never American. All of these Confederate statues represent Americans without any power, only defeat. And when you look at the statues, again, to the common soldier, many of those men were rotting in graves. It's a really surreal experience, for example, to go stand with the Confederate monument in Magnolia Cemetery. It's a very quiet place, and you go in Charleston, you go and you stand there. There's a beautiful monument there, and you're surrounded by these Confederate graves. And particularly if you go and there's a faint breeze, it's almost that the graves are whispering to you. It's a very surreal experience. And, I mean, if you can do it, do it. But that's what these things represent, that connection to our past. I want to leave with a quote from George Mason. Now, George Mason, of course, Southerner from Virginia. I want to leave with a quote from George Mason because this applies today, and it's how far we've gone from a Virginian saying this to Ralph Northam, who is saying monuments gone, move on. This is what George Mason said, quote, "We are descended from the same stock, nurtured in the same principles of freedom, that in crossing the Atlantic we have only changed our climate, not our minds, our natures and dispositions remain unaltered. We claim nothing but the liberty and privileges of Englishmen. We have received them from our ancestors, and with God's leave will transmit them unimpaired to our posterity." Those monuments, those symbols, is transmitting the liberty and privileges of Americans to their posterity. But that is gone when we take those away. It's a sad commentary on where we are today. The rights and liberties and privileges of Englishmen are now, there's a disconnect. And that's why the Abbeville Institute exists. George Mason was just as Southern as Robert E. Lee. And he was aware of it. Until next time, good day.